Well, Johannesburg MMC for Finance, Jolidee Matonga, of course, tabled a budget of 68.1 billion rand for the 2020-2021 financial year on Thursday. The budget was passed after two previous postponements and threats that the city would be placed under administration if it did not present the budget by the 10th of July. Now, the budget included the reaction of property rate tariffs from a proposed 4.9% increase to 4% and water tariffs from a planned 8.6% to 6%, electricity from 8.10% to 6.23%. Independent Ratepayers Association National Chairperson Izak Berg gives us an overview of what the association makes of the budget. Izak, a very good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here on Weekend Dawn. I mean, ultimately, looking at the Finance MMC, of course, as I mentioned, tabling that 68.1 billion rand, and also just looking at what had transpired in the events leading up to that council sitting on Thursday. What has been your take at large of this budget to date?
Good morning, and good morning to your listeners. One has to ask the question, who's going to benefit from this approved budget? Is it the councillors who avoid being put under administration, or is it the budget for the residents of Johannesburg? The DA supported this budget. We've got question marks of their double standards at the moment. In the city of Ekurhuleni, for instance, all the tariffs under the control of the city, the city of Ekurhuleni didn't increase any tariffs under their control, and the DA recorded a vote against that budget. And the budget in Joburg, where there's 4% increase in rates and taxes, they supported the budget, and we actually asked the question why. I think they could have used their opposition role to actually bring the rates and taxes down to a zero rate increase to benefit the residents of Johannesburg. Look, it's not all bad. We are quite impressed with the relief to pensioners in the city of Johannesburg. And we basically feel that some capital projects could have been moved to other years in the multi-year budget to give residents more relief during the 2020-21 budget year. Sometimes opposition must stop playing politics or being opposition and becomes part of the solutions. And I've just got we as a Ratepayers organisation supported the budget in Ekurhuleni, for instance, and we've always had the point of view, if you support 80% of any city's budget or approve, then you approve that budget if you're in support of 80% of a budget. Look, I think more could have been done,
yes,
but it's after all not a bad budget.
Izak, I think just before you mentioned some of the challenges that have come forth, I think just before we delve into some of the concerns that have come through on your end in your analysis, I want to look at the priority areas and, just some of the highlights that came through from that budget that was announced by the City of Johannesburg. I mean, we've seen the reduction of utility rates, so looking at the tariffs, the impact on pensioners as well, and even some of the plans to formalize some of the informal settlements. I mean, what is your ultimate take on some of the key priority areas that have been highlighted on Thursday?
Yeah, look, we've always been of the point of view that our human settlements must get priority, that we actually uplift our informal settlements in certain areas of the cities. And I think that the City of Johannesburg is catering for that. I think they could have put a bit of more money towards that, but then you've got to balance your budget, Then the argument will come up to say maybe then we should have kept the rates and taxes at 4.8 or 4.9%. But it is a balancing act which you've got to get correct, I'm not here to criticize the budget. I'm just here to criticize or ask a question. They were under pressure to approve this budget, but I think at the end they could have done a bit more in tariffs under their control, which the city of Ekurhuleni did.
Izak, I want to now perhaps obviously play devil's advocate here, and as you mentioned, it's quite an important balancing act that needs to happen, and also looking at how reliable and also realistic this budget is in hindsight. We're looking at the impact of COVID-19. We're looking at how that has impacted the city at large. We've seen the power utility, we've seen the issues of waste management services, and even water, being affected during the COVID-19 pandemic. Looking at what was proposed in terms of that 1 billion rand job creation that had been set aside, amongst other initiatives, including a free Wi-Fi Johannesburg as well. I mean, how feasible, reliable, realistic do you think this is ultimately going to be upon implementation for the city?
Look, it's overdue. We need to uplift the use of South Africa, or else we're going to have a lot of problems in the future. Free Wi-Fi, I mean, we've actually picked it up. A lot of metros are doing it. It's to help our youth and our students studying at the moment. And you've got to cater for that. I think a city needs to actually put it as a priority. But once again, you must be sensible in how you're doing it and not overtax your residents to give things for free. And once again, like I said, it's a balancing act. But our youth, I think, especially also with COVID-19 academic year, that's creating a problem. We've got to look after our youth, else they're going to be a lost generation.
I'm speaking of the budget that ultimately had been tabled. I mean, do you think it was enough to cushion against the impact of COVID-19 pandemic at large?
Look, you've got to start somewhere. We actually don't know what the impact really is at this stage. And like the Minister of Finance said, we've got to go back to a zero-based budget, where you actually redraft your budget from scratch. And I think this is a starting point. Luckily, there will be an adjustment budget later in the year, where they can make adjustments to move money around or to cater for COVID-19 disasters or shortcomings that they cater for in their budget.
Izak, I'm looking at the various avenues that, of course, have been highlighted and where the money ultimately will be going to. We're looking at the hospitals. I mean, as we know, currently Gauteng is the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you think more should have been done to allocate or make provisions for the health sector at large, given the situation we find ourselves in? What's your take on that?
Well, look, the health sector is basically a provincial. They've got to cater for that, and they need to budget for that. They've actually moved the ambulances away from all the metro, the ambulance services back to province. But that's a province function, and I think that we must just make sure that province actually budget for that correctly and make enough provisions for health in Gauteng. Basically, but that function has moved away from local government to provincial government.
All right, Izak, I want to bring in the issue of fruitful and wasteful expenditure. I mean, this is obviously also an annual occurrence in any budget. Based on what this looks like during these unprecedented times, what do you think the impact of this is going to be, perhaps on the most vulnerable going forward, by the city, if it's not, cognizant and intentional about stopping the exorbitant amounts that could potentially go wasted during the budget for the year?
Yeah, I think when it comes to fruitful and wasteful expenditure, the residents of local government or the cities must get more involved, ask more questions, and lay charges. Nothing stops an organization like us to lay charges against fruitless and wasteful expenditure, or people from the private sector and bringing charges and bring people to justice or to court for that. But I think that municipalities need to take action on that as well and be harsh on it. I mean, we've just seen on the Auditor General's report now the billions on fruitless and wasteful expenditure and unauthorized expenditure. But it happens in all metros. And we actually the residents must be the watchdog and say, you know what, it's our money. You're going to spend it the way we want you to spend it, and we need to get more involved in public participation. We actually go around with budgets, and when we arrive at cities and town halls, there's 40, 50 people there that participate in drafting budgets or give their input. And I think that needs to stop. People need to get more involved, and it's basically their money, and put pressure on municipalities. But unauthorized and fruitless expenditure, that needs to stop. That needs to stop. I think it's sometimes a big chunk of a budget that is unauthorized. And, action needs to be taken.
Izak, I actually want to go back to the point of service delivery that we spoke about earlier. I mean, we've seen COVID-19 impacting both implementation and capacity at large. Obviously, as manpower is down, we actually heard that they will be employing about 10 people per day to ensure that these services are are executed rather. So with regards to the power utility, I mean, it was announced there's a 3-year capital budget of 2.6 billion rand for the electrification of informal settlements, and also a withdrawal of the proposed fixed charges. I think it was about 200 for private residents in suburbs, and then 200 in the informal and 400 in the private residences. I mean, what is your take ultimately on that? How has that somewhat of a win-win situation for the citizens going forward during these unprecedented times? Many people facing job cuts, salary cuts, etc. I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, look, the Act makes provision for indigents, and you've got to cater for them. And I think you need to control it. You need to make sure that residents in your informal settlements don't use more than what they need to use, or if they use more, that you actually make sure that there's some action taken that don't actually waste electricity. But I think our biggest enemy at the moment with electricity is illegal connections. If we can clamp down on that and bring it down, I think we will have less load shedding or less interruptions when it comes to electricity. And I think the reality is there that metros and municipalities must take action against it.
All right, Izak Berg, let's leave the conversation there. National Chairperson of the Independent Ratepayers Association of South Africa, just chatting to us about the City of Johannesburg, who's finally tabled their budget for the 2020-2021 year. Of course, it's the third attempt. If they did not comply, the city was going to be placed on administration. Izak Berg just updating us on his stance, unpacking the budget for the City of Johannesburg for us.